Okay, it's me, Moser. This is going to be a real quick run-through of the Cells 1.2 Cell Moving Materials Level 3 recitation. So we're going to start with this question. This is number 13 from the spring the biology practice test. So we've got particles moving across a membrane. This is obviously a cell membrane, and it even tells us that if we read. That's handy. And we're asked to select all the statements that describe the motion of these particles based on this time lapse. So the particles crossing the membrane don't have a charge. So let's look at this picture. These particles are going from high concentration to low concentration, and they're just crossing that membrane. There doesn't appear to be any kind of gate, or we're not seeing a little protein channel of any sort. So we know that it's not going to take any energy, and we know that these must be relatively small particles. And they couldn't be ions, because if you've ever put something on that's got static, you know how it sticks to your body? Ions are charged, so they're kind of sticky. So let's read our options here. The particles crossing the membrane do not have a charge. I would agree, because they're just going right through the membrane. They couldn't do that if they had a charge. Movement across the membranes requires energy from ATP. Well, we said that this is going high concentration to low, so it wouldn't require any ATP. Movement across the particles requires energy from glucose. No, because again, doesn't require any energy, does not require added energy. I like that. The particles crossing the membrane could be proteins or carbohydrates. Well, those are big particles, so I don't think so. Particles crossing the membrane could be water or oxygen. Yeah, absolutely, because those are small. They can diffuse right straight across the membrane. And then this last one, the particles crossing the membrane have a strong positive or negative charge. No, they're not ions. We already said that. So those are the only three that are true. Okay, so I included this one. You probably don't have this question with this set. It used to be number 18 on the practice. I have proof. They changed the numbers on me, which is just bogus. You probably did this one on the last matrix. So, red blood cell is placed into an aqueous solution, a water solution. The red blood cell has a lower concentration of protein and sugar than the aqueous solution, as shown in the diagram. In the diagram, the volume of the cell is equal to the volume outside the cell. So I just wanted to discuss this with you. Like I said, you would have done it on the last matrix, but you probably didn't understand it then. So, since the concentration of protein and sugar is lower inside the cell, that means it's higher outside the cell. So that's the concentration of, we'll just say protein. So is lower in the cell, So the concentration of protein has got to be higher outside. And the water then has to be higher inside and lower outside. So water's going to go where there's less of it. So water is going to flood out of this cell. Hey, there we go. Water from the red blood cell will diffuse into the solution. Okay, so this is a fun question. I'm going to admit that the first time I looked at this question, I failed to see the arrows. Without the arrows, the question makes no sense. And a number of my students have said they didn't see the key. Without the key, some parts of this question don't make any sense. But the diagram shows an incomplete cross-section of a cell membrane. 3 different particles are shown moving across the membrane into or out of the cell. Determine the appropriate transport mechanism of each particle and move the correct membrane segment into the blank box. Okay, so we've only got one that shows the use of ATP. So I'm going to handle that one first. Do any of these show particles moving from low concentration to high? Yes. This one, look at that, low concentration, high concentration, yet we're pumping them uphill. So that would be our ATP, our protein pump. So now we've got 2 that are just diffusing straight across. One is right across the phospholipids, and one is going through a channel. The key tells us that this is oxygen, and we know that oxygen is tiny and that oxygen can diffuse directly across the membrane. So that's going to be our oxygen. This stuff, we're told, is glucose, and glucose is a little bit bigger. It would need some kind of channel to move into the cell. That's it. Okay, so this question really confounded a lot of people. Here's what they expect you to look at. This is an onion cell in a 3% solution, 3% salt solution. And in that 3% salt solution, the cell's pretty normal, maybe shriveling a tiny bit. So what they want to know is what concentration of salt would cause it to do that, to shrivel up completely, and what would cause it to swell up. So if it's starting to shrivel a little bit maybe in a 3% solution, a higher salt solution would cause it to shrivel maybe completely. So if you said 4%, if you said 5%, if you said 10%, any of those, I believe, would get you full credit. It just has to be a higher number than 3. Now, to get your points for this second part, it has to be a number lower than 3. So 2% solution, 1% solution. I even had somebody who put, a 0.5% solution, because any of those are less salty than that 3% solution, and so they would cause the cell to bulge. Number 14 on the spring, 17 released items. What structural feature of the cell membrane allows molecules such as oxygen and carbon dioxide to diffuse in and out of the cell? Oh boy. Well, the cell membrane contains protein molecules. True statement, but is that how oxygen and CO2 get in and out? No. The cell membrane contains cholesterol molecules. Also true sometimes, but is that how oxygen and carbon dioxide get out? No. The cell membrane is made up of 2 layers of phospholipids. So remember, those little phospholipids make kind of a loose weave, like a loosely woven sweater or blanket. And that's what allows stuff to go in and out of the cell membrane. This last one, the cell membrane is anchored to the cytoplasm by the cytoskeleton. It's also true, but it's not how the oxygen and carbon dioxide get in and out. Oh, everybody's favorite question. If you remember back to level 1 where I made you count particles because I was a jerk, this is why I did it, because you're going to have to count particles on the state test. So I find it easiest to look at this one first, because this one's clearly got about the same concentration inside and outside the cell. Remember the word isotonic maybe? This one's isotonic, and so what that means is that water is going to go into and out of the cell at approximately the same rate. So if that's the case, then there will be no effect on the cell. It's not going to do anything. It's just going to sit there. I look at this one next because it's easy for me to remember that salt makes jerky. So obviously there's a lot more salt outside this cell than there is inside it, which means that we're making jerky here. It's going to draw water out of the cell. So this cell is going to shrivel. And this one is in fresh water. So if you put something in fresh water, think about our constantly peeing fish. Water's going to flood into this cell, and it's going to burst. Okay, this might take the cake and the record for the most elaborate setup for a really simple question. Student performs an experiment to study the transport of water in and out of cells. He uses a clear semi-permeable plastic bag to represent the cell membrane, places 3 plastic bags of the same size containing a 1% sucrose solution into 3 different beakers. One beaker contains distilled water, one contains a 3% solution, one contains a 1% solution. Diagram shows the experimental setup, the plastic bag, and the appearance of each bag. Which statement provides a conclusion about the transport of water in and out? Well, all that information, was so that you could tell them that the water concentration, the water movement into the cell depends on the percentage of concentration of solutes inside and outside the bag. That's it. Water moves freely both inside and outside the bag independent of solute. That's not what we're seeing. Water transports solutes out of the bag. Nope. This says that the semi-permeable bag, it doesn't say if it's permeable to water and salt, but usually it's just water. Water moves into the bag. No, not viable. It's option B. So on this one, when I first read this question, I'll admit that I kind of freaked out because I thought it was a nerve transmission question. It's not. It's a transport question. So again, they give you a big setup about how cells have to keep a balance of potassium and sodium ions inside and outside the cell. And then it asks which describes how a nerve cell maintains homeostasis regarding those ions. So by converting sodium ions in the cell to potassium, can your cells do that? No. By blocking both types of ions from moving in or out? No, also not true. By transporting both types of ions through protein pumps in the cell membrane? I like that. We've talked about protein pumps. By producing more potassium in the cell. You can't make potassium in your cells. No living thing can. Potassium is made inside of dying stars, and it comes from soil on our planet, so that's not it. It is C. Okay, I guess I forgot to erase my answers here. So again, we've got a big setup. Student fills a beaker, 5% salt solution, puts a dialysis bag with a 15% salt solution into the beaker, measures the salinity after 5 minutes. So the key is they tell you this time that the dialysis tubing is permeable to both the salt and the water. So what's going to happen? Well, water is going to move into the bag. So water will move into the tubing, water into tubing because the lower concentration of water is in the tubing. Salt, because it can also move, salt will actually move out of tubing. Salt out of tube. Okay. All right, last question. We've got a plant cell. Which illustration shows what will most likely happen if the cell is placed in a solution with a low concentration of solute? That sucker's going to swell up because if you put it in a hypotonic solution, go ahead and say the word hypo and make a big round O mouth like that guy. That's the Bobinator, don't ask. But he's saying hypotonic with his mouth open real wide. When you say that big O sound, that cell swells up like a big round mouth. Okay, crazy. Let's do a very quick recap and review. So the big difference between active and passive transport, energy. So passive transport doesn't require any energy. Because of that, we're only moving materials from areas of high concentration to low. Active transport does require energy, and because we're putting energy in, we can move materials sort of uphill, up the concentration gradient. The first kind of passive transport we talked about was diffusion. If it's water, we call it osmosis, but we can also diffuse things like CO2 and O2 across a cell membrane. Facilitated diffusion is kind of like leaving a gate open. So we're not expending any energy to pump things up or down the gradient, up the gradient, but we've got sort of a wider opening in the cell membrane. For active transport, ion pumps have been the thing that we've focused on the most, and those are, little proteins in the cell membrane that pump ions, charged particles, up the hill. Endocytosis and exocytosis are more for the really big stuff. So this is where that cell membrane kind of contacts the material, grabs it, and flips itself inside out. And you can get stuff in or out of the cell that way. It's just like poop or scooping with a bag for your dog. If you have questions on any of this stuff, please check in with me. But other than that, that's it.